Business Forum. This is our 4th edition, and let me just walk you through very quickly why do we do the forum. We started the series back in 2020. It is always a small-scale forum, and this is by design, and it's also by invitation, bringing people from different walks of life, whether government, public policy, private sector, civil society, scholars, of course, researchers, both from Egypt and from other countries, friends of ours, corporate partners, universities that we work with one objective, which is to continuously inform our stakeholders at the school on the directions, trends, and issues that need to be addressed within our offerings. What I mean by that, our degree programs, our research endeavors, but also our services, and surely our community development activities. So if I can just give you very quickly, the first one back in 2020 was all about disruption. The second one was about organizational transformation. The third one was on the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the fourth, this year's, is reflecting a number of aspects that are very much timely and relevant to the context of operating a business school. So we started off the day before yesterday with the first roundtable on sustainable finance. And then we moved on to the second, which is the ecosystem of family business and how they can operate and be resilient in a turbulent environment, to say the least. The third, yesterday morning, was about micro-credentials and lifelong learning and corporate development. And the fourth, yesterday afternoon, was about case studies, the transformation of the case studies journey as a pedagogical approach in business and management education. The final and, in my view, one of the most important roundtable this year's Business Forum is the one we're starting now. And the reason I'm saying that higher education institutions around the world, and surely business schools, for a number of years have been increasing their attention to their role in society beyond the shareholders' interests, their social impact, how they contribute beyond the specific context of the offerings within the schools or universities. And when we say discipline of economics and addressing SDGs challenges, I want to be very clear. We're very serious about this in the context that we're not planning just scratching the surface, meaning inviting a guest speaker or asking a faculty to really work on a research piece on SDGs and the like, but actually seamlessly integrating SDGs, but also ESG, into the curriculum. It's very important to, when we shape, or we try to shape the future leaders of tomorrow, they understand what is the macro level ecosystem, what impacts the decisions they make, and what the decisions they make throughout their career and journeys, and how it will impact the society at large. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor to the chair of the session, and I look forward to an enlightening and informative conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Kamel, for the introduction, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the roundtable, and I'm very happy to see very familiar faces, and it was a very lovely morning seeing everyone networking and engaging in the discussions already before we start the roundtable. So I think we are really bringing to the roundtable today a hot topic that is to be discussed on all levels, and today we're bringing it to the academic level as well. So let me start by saying that the Sustainable Development Goals comprise an international framework that was primarily set out to guide countries' development efforts. The SDGs were designed to provide a basis to end poverty, eradicate hunger, improve quality of life, and ensure that the balance between environmental, social, and economic sustainability is achieved. Developing countries have been facing challenges in achieving the SDGs, and these challenges range from global shocks to the clear understanding of the economic dimensions of achieving the goals within the 2030 frame. Challenges can be further broken down into instability, implementation, and governance, most of which are driven by inequality, globalization, environmental degradation, resource use, and population diversity. In addressing these challenges, countries will be raising their living standards and addressing the inequality of opportunity in a manner that would inevitably improve the quality of economic growth, which ultimately increases its long-term potential. Recently, a new global economic discourse emerged, giving rise to structural transitions to accommodate new realities, such as deglobalization, demographic shifts, climate change, and digitalization. These new realities present new and unprecedented challenges facing the entirety of the economic realm as both a profession and a discipline. The discipline of economics in academia has managed to define and inform economic problems through its mathematical and econometric modeling. Recent literature analyzing the role of the discipline of economics has suggested that these models have failed economics given the recurrent recessions and the inability to address the multiple challenges. The real question remains, what are the critical priorities in SDGs that the discipline of economics needs to address for the developing world? To what extent is the science of economics ready and equipped to address the pressing challenges and pave the way for achieving the SDGs? How can economics harness the power of artificial intelligence to respond to global challenges? And finally, what is the role of academic institutions in shaping a discipline that meets the current and future challenges globally, regionally, and locally? On this panel, we have distinguished speakers both in academia and as practitioners. And we have Dr. Shireen Shawarbi, Professor of Economics at Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University, Dr. José de Sousa, Professor of Economics at the University of Paris-Saclay, France, and Dr. Huda Youssef, Senior Economist at the World Bank. So I'll just give some housekeeping rules before we start. So we will start with the 10 to 12-minute interventions from the panelists, and then we will go around the table for our distinguished participants. Please make sure to introduce yourself, and you will have 2 to 3 minutes for your intervention to give more room for others to participate in the discussion. We will also welcome comments from the observers, which we're very happy to see a lot of our students among the observers. So we will welcome comments from the observers to share their views and their comments. So thank you, and I would like to start with our first speaker, Dr. Shireen. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be among this distinguished group of people, different specializations, and this is what we really want. Thank you, Dina, for inviting me to share my opinions about the role of economics in improving SDGs, basically. But I respond to some of what you highlighted in your introduction, whether with respect to the definition of economics, basically, and about the failure of economics in predicting or avoiding crisis. So the definition that was shared, do you want me to put this? Okay. So the American Economic Association definition about economics, it's a broad discipline that helps us understand historical trends, interpret today's headlines, and make predictions about the coming years. And the very famous definition that we teach to our students that is coming from Lionel Robbins is about allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. And I fully agree with Amartya Sen, who said that this is terribly narrowing the scope of our discipline. Our discipline should be about the well-being, human welfare. And we go back to Arthur Pigou, who argues that the beginning of economic science should be about understanding and getting rid of the factors behind all the bad things that come with poverty and deprivation. There is an American philosopher who described economic as the reasoned and humane evaluation of the social well-being that Adam Smith himself saw as essential to the task of the economist. Keynes, who said it implicitly, had in his general theory a statement about the political problem of mankind is about how to combine three things: economic efficiency, social justice, and individual liberty. Unfortunately, economics was turned to focus just on one of the Keynes trios, economic efficiency, without looking at how this can come at the expense of other elements of the human being. And if we agree that we need to change this together and share the new, it's not a new definition, but to go back to the essence of economics, then I can see that the SDGs match perfectly with economics. So the question now is about whether economics help to face the challenges of achieving these SDGs. Well, I can see that economics, first, we have 17 SDGs with 169. I don't know why they didn't make it 170, but it's 169 goals. And I like very much the division that Mahmoud Mohiuddin made to this 19. So he had 2 for poverty, 1 and 10, 3 for climate and biodiversity, 4 for social and human development, 6 for economic dimensions, and 1 for governance, 1 for partnership. So at least we have 6 goals that directly relate to economics. But also all other goals should be treated in one of their dimensions through economics. So economics is one of the core disciplines to deal with SDGs. But let's define what the challenges of SDGs are. As Dina said, we have the stability, and I would add to the global stability and economic stability actually in our country, stability of policies. We do not continue any of the policies for long. So stability is one challenge, implementation one challenge, and governance is the third challenge. There are many other challenges, but let's focus on these 3 challenges and how economics deal with them. First, I think that under the word economics, this discipline, we have so many fields that can deal with any of the goals that we are talking about. And I discovered a new field that it was the first time I have read about, home economics. And this perfectly matches with SDGs. But anyway, so we have plenty of fields that can deal with this. So for stability, for instance, and these two argue or disargue about that economics fail to predict, so we have failed in something. Yes, we failed to prevent or to predict crisis. This happened in 1930 during the Great Depression. This happened during the 2008, the global financial crisis, but also before this during the stagnation period in the 70s. So it happened several times, but every time it was due because of the occurrence of something that economists did know about. This is the evolution of the world. Sometimes we came up with revolutionary ideas, like Keynes, for instance, who made like a paradigm shift in the economic thinking, and we consider him as the father of macroeconomics, modern macroeconomics. And sometimes it's evolution, incremental changes in the way we think to minimize or to avoid some of the mistakes that we have. And after the global financial crisis, we had been, even economists had been knocking on economics and economists who failed to predict. They failed to predict because there were too many things new to economists, like the derivatives, financial derivatives, and this was not included in their models. This doesn't mean that models failed and we don't need them. Medicine failed to predict that COVID could appear, failed to give us immediate medication, right? And many people died, right? Does this mean that medicine failed in all fronts? We did not fail in all fronts. We fail when there are, and the world has become very complicated. Innovation, the discoveries. So we have too many things on the table. Some of them are incorporated in the model, some are not. No economist admitted that we did not fail. We said that, it failed, but there is a continuous review. This is at the global level. Reviewing, rethinking, and they came up with ideas of whether to fix the SDGs or even to rebuild the new macroeconometric models. But and I don't care, it's not I don't care, I care more about what is happening in our country. Are we aware of what is happening there? Can we discuss technically what they are doing? Can we propose some adjustment in this model to fit, the characteristics of our economies, to discuss poverty, inequality? They don't discuss poverty, they don't discuss inequality. We claim that we have a population growth problem, we should address it. So I think we need to build our capacity technically, theoretically, to be able to discuss this issue and to have our share contribution to this debate. Second, in order to do, yes, we need to have this and to have our own models. We need to build our teams. As said by many economists, Blanchard, for instance, he said that this new macroeconomic stream has led to Mionism, if I remember the word, and we need pluralism. So pluralism, to my opinion, should be that the team should be constructed from the many fields of economics. We help each other. We should not focus on macroeconomic, monetary, and fiscal policy. There are other policies that we need, especially in developing countries like Egypt. We have to have intergenerational composition of this team. We should encourage our youth. They are, I think, technically more able to deal with the advancements, but the experience of my generation, for instance, of Dr. Heba's generation, will enrich their understanding of the reality. We have become more technicians rather than thinkers. Also accumulation of knowledge. Unfortunately, I don't see many of our, Egyptian scholars referring to each other. We prefer to refer to foreign papers rather than what we're doing. But it should be, if we want to have a transformation, which we're aiming at, we need these incremental changes to build upon each other. We should not work in separate silos. One constraining element in our case will be data and information. And this is usually, we deal with the available data, which I think either is not of good quality or sometimes missing or sometimes unavailable for us, inaccessible. But also sometimes you're faced with the policymakers telling us that you don't have the full picture, you don't have the right information. Is this our problem? And my reply always is was to, if we don't have the if you don't share the full information, if you don't give us the right data, then bear with us because we have to say what we are saying. If you want us to help you, then you have to share the information and the data that can make us of more use to you. 10 minutes are okay. A couple. For the implementation, economics will be very useful to help identifying the contradictory, complementary, neutral goals, because with 169 goals, we're definite that this will be contradictory in large part of them. So it's economics that will help you identify what would be contradictory and to prioritize them. You need to have some kind of feasibility study, some simulation of their impact to see which will help you achieve your objectives. This is what economics does perfectly. We cannot say that economics will fail us on this. It will help us at least to indicate where we should direct our resources. It will help us, and this is the common problem, the financing gap of the SDGs, and to ensure fiscal sustainability. Some countries are too ambitious and they implement large projects, they spend a lot of resources, whether they can sustain this or not, and at the end this may fire back on these countries. One last thing is the governance. We need to cooperate and to coordinate, and this is really difficult in our society, and we can see this even at the level of ministries. We hear that they are working each in his territory. They do not cooperate. They don't talk to each other. We need to talk to each other. And this means that there should be venues of public debates. Unless we discuss it and we discover where we have the mistakes, we will never be able to fix things. And unfortunately, and I would like, I cannot keep on saying the elements I have many others, but if we keep just talking, then we will never change the situation. It's talking after having rigorous studies and research that come up with implementable solutions. Policymakers say that we tell them what to do, and they don't need to know because they know what to do. They need to know how to do it. So we have to move to the next step of how to do. And always we say you have to increase efficiency, you have to create decent jobs. How to do this? So if we have things that are written, we discuss them, we move to another level of knowledge, and we build on this knowledge. But unfortunately, we have very nice gatherings, I would call, events. We discuss things, and we go back home, nothing changed. We go to a next event, we say the same things, almost the same things, and nothing changed. We need to end this vicious cycle by committing ourselves to know more about the theoretical foundation that I have the feeling, unfortunately, that we do not seize theoretical foundations. We skip the parts with the mathematical kind of features, because this is difficult, but without this, the mathematical, statistical, econometric foundations for our future leaders, I don't think we'll be able to do a great job to our country as economists. This is what I have to say. Thank you very much, and maybe other ideas will be shared if you raise the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shireen, and I'll actually take 3 positive points from your intervention, which is prioritize, cooperate, and coordinate. I do see them as positive points to take the discussion forward, and I perfectly agree with you that we need to make sure that these discussions are coming up with outcomes that we can really use to shape the future. I'll move to the next speaker, Dr. Jose.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dina. Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to speak in this roundtable in front of distinguished speakers and colleagues. Thank you very much. So it's also my first time in leadership. I'm very impressed by what it's done. Okay. I want to speak about what my question will be: what has economics to say about growth and inequality? And I will have to discipline myself because it's a discipline of economics, right? So and try to speak in 10 minutes, which is going to be a challenge. Okay. First, I should say that we have growth, but we don't have a recipe for growth, right? So I'm sorry. I even asked ChatGPT about the recipe, and he said it's related to many factors. Oh, thank you, ChatGPT. At least our job is safe for today. Maybe not tomorrow, but today it's okay. However, I asked ChatGPT about the recipe of an apple pie, and it gave me like a list of instructions, ingredients, the right dosage to have a homemade apple pie, a very good one. So yeah, if I see what the economic literature is saying about growth, we have the ingredients. We know that geography matters. We know that the institutions matter. We know that technological progress also matters. We also know about education and human capital, right? So, but what is interesting, if you take, for example, technological progress and education, they all tend to explain growth, right? But there is also the reverse causality. Growth may also impact human capital accumulation and also technological progress, right? The country is growing, then it's easier to invest in education and also have technological progress. And this is not the case for the Apple recipe, right? So they are not speaking to the ingredients and back and forth. And also it's interesting if you look at the 2 key ingredients of growth, like education and technological progress, you see that the more educated is the population, the higher is the average of human capital, the easier it will be to get patents, to innovate, right? So there is a link between them. But there is also a link in the other way, which is interesting, is that, for example, if you look at the Industrial Revolution in the UK and also in some developed countries, it was really the first time where, because of the technical progress, because of some industries set in some regions, they demanded education. So it was not only about education increasing technological progress, but also about, there is technological progress, there are some industries, and then they need education. So it was really the first time that we have seen that education was not only for entertainment or for religious matters, it was also to acquire skills. And today is not anymore about industry, today is about finance, about services, about digital. And this will be maybe the first recommendation of economists, is that we should, as countries, invest in high-tech sectors, because by investing in those high-tech sectors, probably there will be follow-up demand in education in these sectors. And this is probably more important even than supplying education. So this demand factor. And so probably it will be the recommendation of economics: invest in those high-tech sectors instead of low-tech sectors like maybe infrastructures or textile sector, for example. Okay, so we have growth, and then we have the ingredients. And then growth is linked to inequality, which is also one of the SDGs. And inequality, it's hard for economists to speak about inequality, because if you look back to Adam Smith, it's another great economist, right? Smith is saying that we need some inequality because we need incentives to work, we need incentives for effort, and so probably we need some inequality for growth, right? But economists also started working recently more on inequality, and there is this idea that inequality may be bad for growth, right? So, and let me take one analogy, like the highway analogy. So take a highway with 3 lanes, and cars are zones, right? So here we talk about within inequality, not inequality between countries, which is also important. So, okay, so let me go back to this analogy. Take the highway, 3 lanes, and you have cars. Cars are all zones, and they progress slowly, right? But they progress, and I mean, it's not big growth, but it's growth, right? This is one scenario. Take another scenario where you have 2 lanes which are completely blocked, and there is a fast track. There is a lane which is moving fast. And then, at the end of the day, you may have the same aggregate growth than the other one, but you see what could happen, right? So because there is only one lane functioning, then all the cars start moving to this lane, and it can lead to chaos, to accidents. So I do prefer the one where everyone is probably moving slowly, and at the end you may get higher growth. Okay, I don't know how much time I have, but just to say that another recommendation of economists is probably we have to reduce these inequalities, like inequalities between poor and rich. Gender inequality also is an important SDG, and we have to reduce these inequalities. And this also speaks to this education, right? So if there are barriers, entry barriers for some, for example, to be doctor, for women, for example, or to be full profs, and this may impact the incentives to educate, and so this will have an impact also on growth at the end of the day. And there are work in the US showing that the reduction of barriers of entry in doctors between the 60s and today had a big impact on growth and on productivity. So reduce these inequalities, I think it's super important. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. José. And again, from your speech, I'll highlight one of the main important points, which is education and investment in human capital as a key ingredient that will be driving economic growth. I'll now move to our third speaker of today. Dr. Huda Yusuf she's actually going to share with us a few slides, even though the setup of the forum, and we understand it's not more of an academic, but again, the slides are going to put her intervention into the focus so we can actually have an easier way to follow up. So thank you very much, Dr. Huda, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today to speak among this distinguished group. And I'm truly honored, and I hope my intervention today will add some useful insights into that important and confusing topic somehow. So let me, when I was contacted to speak in today's event, I thought a lot about my contribution and how I can add to the discussion. And the first thing that came to my mind are many jokes that are being said about economists. This is one of them. So basically, apparently, an economist is a person who, when finding something that works in reality, starts wondering whether it works in theory. And the second joke that also speaks to our discussion today is there are apparently 2 types of economists. Those who don't know, and well, since they don't know, they can't tell us what to do, and those who know that they don't know. So these are more problematic. Starting from there, I also went back to the definition of economics, the one we were taught in undergrad. And again, I found the same definition, that economics is the study of scarcity, how to allocate scarce resources to satisfy unlimited human needs. But then I also start thinking, how about, sorry, I just went too quick. Yeah, how about abundance? We live in also a world where other resources exist in abundance. And the question then can become how to efficiently, equitably, safely use those resources also to satisfy human needs. And let me give you some example of these abundant resources that now exist around us, and we still didn't quite figure out how to use them. So the first one is straightforward. It's about the natural resources that are around us, and specifically renewable resources. So you can think solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectrical power. And did you know that a scientific fact that the sun actually sends to Earth an amount of energy in 1 hour that is sufficient to meet the energy needs of the globe in an entire year? Quite amazing. Scientists, engineers, economists also figured out that there is no way other than shifting to clean energy. But we're still also figuring out how to do that exactly, because this is still expensive. The use of clean energy is expensive and difficult to implement. Technology has made it a little bit easier to do that with time. And since I'm speaking about technology and data, this is another abundant resource that is a characteristic of our modern life. The amount of information and data that is out there has never been seen before in humanity. So you can, of course, think internet, digital technology, big data, newer concepts like AI and machine learning. All of these concepts. This tells us that maybe there are other ways of doing economic analysis other than going and knocking on statistical offices' doors and waiting whether they give us the data or not. Maybe there are other ways to do it. Maybe governments can get more ready to that era where what is now known as GovTech, it can help solve many problems. And I looked at the recent report of the World Bank, which is the GovTech Maturity Index report. It tells us that around 70% of countries today, or in 2022, are exactly at the same place where they were in 2020. They have not changed, even though these are the 2 years that have witnessed COVID and the implications of COVID and the eye-opener that COVID brought by. And it also tells us that the level, the income level of those countries would make an impact on whether a government adopt it or not. The third element that I would like to bring into our discussion today is us, people. So some of you would have heard that the world population has crossed the 8 billion people, or number of population worldwide in November 2022. Most of the growth happened in developing countries. I think when I looked at the number, it was that in the last maybe 70 years, the number or the share of population living in developing countries moved to around 66% to 83%. But there's not only population growth. Now we witness migration flows and unfortunately also forced displacement. I work on Jordan. It's a country that has seen pretty much overnight 1.3 million people moving to their territory from the Syrian crisis. And these are people that need to work, they need to be fed, they need to get educated, they need to get treated, and a lot of other human rights. So what did economics think about the abundance of human resources and what it means specifically for labor markets? The last element I want to throw in the discussion today is ideas. Ideas are everywhere. Throughout years, they have been underpinning social, economic, political progress, and when there is a free flow of ideas and the freedom to express them, this is when you can see progress happening. We always say that ideas are powerful, but there's also our powerful tools to make progress. But there's also the idea of power, vested interests, the enabling environment to see those ideas getting tested, written, discussed, collectively discussed, so that we can find solutions to our modern life problems. So what does all that mean for the future of economics? My conclusions are, I think, straightforward. The first one has been already said. I think economists need to see their work as very importantly just a piece in a bigger puzzle. So they would need to collaborate with data scientists, health and education professionals, natural disaster experts, also other branches of social sciences, psychologists, political scientists, of course. All of these people need to come together, and economists don't need to work alone anymore. The sustainability element, of course, I'm putting here a picture of a tree, but it's much more than that. We can't ignore the environment anymore, and we need to be very careful about the impact of policies and human activity on the surrounding, because we've all seen that the cost can be very high. And then, of course, what it means for teaching economics and practicing economics, we need to invent the way to do that and think about the now distinguishing between the infinite sources, resources that some of them we mentioned today, but also that other resources are finite, and how to make a smart use of both. And then very, very importantly, I think Dr. Sheen touched upon this element as well, is the way we communicate economic analysis and findings to the general public, but also very importantly to a policymaker, how to find new ways to engage. Basically put ourselves in their shoes, try to think, if we were to think about the elevator pitch, what would you say to a policymaker in one sentence that is compelling enough to make him hear you for the rest of the discussion? And I'll leave you with that personal feeling I personally have, that sometimes we need to re-enroll in an economics department to learn it all over again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huda, for the very interesting intervention and bringing in the idea of abundance as opposed to the idea of scarcity that I think each one in the room has been learning as the main concept or the main definition of economics, and bringing in, again, the power of people. And this brings us, again, to investing in education and human capital as one of the key investments, and brings the question about sustainability to the table again. And is sustainability only about the environment, or sustainability is a process that would involve a lot more dimensions than just the environment? So I'll now give the room to the participants, and I'll start with, I think everyone will enjoy hearing this first participant. Dr. Hiba Handousa, will give her the floor to have the first word from the participants. Thank you, Dr. Hiba.
I'm delighted to be here, and to me the SDGs are a major part of the work we do on the ground with the poor in Upper Egypt. What I think about the value of economics where the SDGs is concerned, I think it's of paramount value, and it doesn't make mistakes. I think statistics is a very reliable study and methodology, and Egypt has made enormous gains relative to any country I know in terms of the map of poverty for Egypt. It's now available every 3 years with 43 different variables, from what the floor of the house is made of. And of course, for the poorest of the poor, it's mud, as well as the density of those who live per square meter in their house. And that's why when you want to implement, you cannot implement without having this kind of knowledge, okay? And that's how Egypt was able to start on the Karama, Takaful, and Forsa, following Takaful. I'm working on the ground in 5 different Upper Egypt governorates, and to instill knowledge among young people, because we focus on women and youth. And if you look at the situation of youth, like the study that was based on this huge surveys and follow-ups that were made by the Population Council, again, it's all surveys, and the answers you get are what you need. So we've been following up for 11 years since the revolution, and I would say that the 17 SDGs are all measurable, which is the feat of the UNDP, based on the work of Mahbub al-Haq, who was first thought to be a heretic until they introduced all of the variables that he thought mattered. In my view, the main entries on the SDGs, all that huge number and even larger number of indicators we measure, can be divided into 3 clusters or 3 groups which matter. The first cluster, the first 9 goals, are all about social justice. And the second group is the last 5, which are all about the climate change and oceans and everything that we're losing very fast around the planet. And in between, there are very interesting 3 or 4 of the goals which talk about accountability. So this is really, again, a realm not of statistics, but of institutional economics. Because what we fail to give attention to is how important the politics of a situation are rather than the economics. So if you want to blame someone, you can look at our leaders and ministries and those who are responsible for decision-making and for spending. So on the first set, I'd like to say that the importance of economic analysis is in meeting 3 key challenges of our era, okay, in terms of poverty. So here is, the challenge is the growing distance between the rich and the poor. Equally in the United States as everywhere else, the rich get richer relative to the poor, and that's what the statistics show us everywhere. So when we say we have some 9 entries that tell us about socioeconomic empowerment, all of the first 9 SDGs, then we better give them a lot of attention, The second challenge is the horrific destruction of our environment and the failure of governments to provide solutions to urbanization. I think for Egypt at least, that's the third major challenge. And again, you have statistics mostly that have to do with the, again, the UN agencies that are responsible for following up on urban plans and how you push the newcomers in Egypt towards new cities and the like. And we haven't done too badly, but there are a lot of problems that could be resolved there as well. Since the previous speakers have spoken mostly about the social and economic, and I think that really, with regards each and every one of the SDGs, it's not social alone, it's not economics alone, and remember that economics is a social science after all. So what I do on the ground is it's all integrated. We work with agriculture and small industry, manufacturing, and all of the social services in the same village. In Qena, where is our main governorate, we work in 70 different villages, and the poverty map by village is incredible, and now it's available every 3 years, so there's no excuse for not having the data. The hikes, the youth and the youth survey that was started a long time ago now are all helping us to identify what to do, where to do it, and how to follow up and measure our performance. So I'll just give, if I may, a few minutes to the side that wasn't covered by the previous speakers, which has to do with development-driven localization. Localization is what the Minister of Planning asked me to write about, and I told her I know a lot about decentralization. She said, okay, you can write about decentralization. And then I understood what localization means and how important it is. And I think it's one of the major routes to having the 17 goals achieved. And it's got to do with administration. Egypt has continued to be this hydraulic society that we know about from history. And since I'm working on the ground in 5 different governorates in the south, I know how difficult it is to achieve the kind of results we want without the power at the bottom, the power and the accountability of the governor and the mudiriyat, which are the Merkaz leadership. So if you work very closely with them, you discover that you can do wonders, absolute wonders. So we work very closely with the people who are in education. We work very closely with the Directorate for Health, with the Directorate for Education. That's vital. If you're talking about how to raise the productivity of these people, you have to immediately go to vocational training, and you find it's absolute disaster. So we specified, after studying, that one sector would be perfect for women, ready-made garment. And we had to take all of the teachers in these TVET schools, and we did it. Over 2 years, we raised their average from 20% on the first exam to over 80% as an average for all the schools in Qena. So I want to say that don't despair. Egypt has wonderful statistics, really amazing, and it's become totally open and regular and available. So we have no excuse not to deliver. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is the first round of applause today, which goes to Dr. Hiba. Thank you very much. I think we can now open the floor for interventions from our key participants. And I think we raised two very important points around the table with the discussion now. One of them is the direction or is the viewpoint of researchers or the academic or the professionals from the academic perspective producing the research and arguing about data availability or access to data, but we also have the side view of the practitioners which are working on the ground and how the research is actually showing or opening up where the priorities really are. And I think among the questions that we are raising in this roundtable is, what are the priorities that we need to address, how to define our priorities, and how the future and building capacities, and again, as Dr. Hiba was saying, identifying education as an empowerment tool, how can we actually define these priorities and have our research, have our teaching are actually focused and rounded around these priorities that are defined. So I'd like to open the floor. Dr. Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this. Let me start by saying I'm not an economist. I work in the field of industry and in particular manufacturing. But it seems like one of the economists, Nobel laureate, has got us into a lot of trouble. Milton Friedman in 1970 wrote an essay in the New York Times, and it was titled A Friedman Doctrine. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. And from that point onwards, for 50 years, the direction has been focus on profits and only profits. And actually, Milton Friedman in debates said that if you do anything other than realize profits for your shareholders, you're veering off from the purpose of the organization. Fortunately, in 2019, there was the Business Roundtable in the US, and which includes CEOs of very large companies like Bezos and Tim Cook. And they decided that it's time to drop the shareholder first priority or principle and pledge to improve our society. And because I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I just want to focus on what we need to do in education. We really need to make sure that we convey this message with examples and case studies to students. There's a professor in Oxford University called Colin Meyer, and he speaks highly of a company in Denmark called Novo Nordisk. And Novo Nordisk works on diabetes. They make medications for diabetes. But they've decided that they really need to eradicate diabetes and educate people as to how to prevent diabetes from happening in the first place, type 2 diabetes. And so they go to parts of the world where diabetes is prevalent, and they spend money, part of their profits, in educating people. There are many examples. Unlike what we see in companies that still exist to this day that make sugary drinks that are not healthy but they make profits. So the mindset needs to shift, and I think it's the responsibility of universities to educate future leaders as to what the purpose of companies are, and I'm talking about the School of Business at large, that it is purpose-driven rather than just profit-driven. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sara, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dina, and thank you for inviting me to this important event and discussion. I actually, after our distinguished professors have intervened and gave their insights. There is, not, for myself, no much to add, but just two types of interventions here. One very generic on the role of academic institutions and universities in building the culture about SDGs inside the institutions, inside the university or the academic institution, and the other intervention is about the economics discipline in particular. The first one is when we discuss how to integrate, how to build, how to cultivate the culture of SDGs within our university, we have to understand that we need to address the global context of the SDGs as well as our national context as well. So, for example, we try in our university or in our academic institution to instill the culture of SDGs globally, the climate problem, the sustainability, and so on, and the Egyptian national problems that relate to SDGs with all its aspects, the ESG, the environmental, the economic, and so on. I have read an article in the United Nations about the academic impact, the role of academic institutions in enforcing SDGs, and it spoke about 3 pillars. The first one is building, I'm quoting here, expanding human capital with SDGs perspective within the curricula, within the taught disciplines, the idea of interdisciplinarity, and faculties and schools together joining in addressing SDGs challenges, implementing the agenda as an academic institution, supporting with expertise and knowledge, the science in implementing the agenda. And the third thing that was mentioned in this article is what is called action-oriented research. What we call applied research, or not the blue sky research, the research that drives solutions. This is what we really need, either for, both for addressing global challenges and also for addressing our national challenges, the policy driving research. We need to instill this culture not just for the staff, but also for the student, to train them on research that provides solutions through simple techniques and simple methods and ways, in addition to the academic conventional methods, of course. The second point that I want to speak about is related to the economic discipline in particular, and also involving this idea of multi and interdisciplinarity. Now, what is said in order to provide practical solutions beyond the ideological ideas is going from science to policy and then to behavior. So the importance of behavioral aspects, behavioral science, the experimental tools. I know now we are growing on this science. I know you have here at the university, you're leading also on the experimental studies and so on. So integrating the behavioral dimensions, the nudging, the idea of moving from the science, the economics, taking it, of course, to another level of policy, or the driving to policy and change, and then the needed behavioral change, the nudging, the soft intervention. This is very important, not just for research, but also for nudging about changes within the academic institution itself, the university itself, the campus, and so on. The last point, I would like to really emphasize the importance of multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity approach. It's no way, I was going to say what Dr. Hoda just said, that economics problem can no longer be solved within the economic discipline alone. The big data, the computational sciences, the experimental, and so on, it's no longer economics only can solve SDGs or provide a solution alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara. And I think here we're bringing to the discussion not only communication to policymakers, but another level, which is communication to the end user or to the consumer. We have Dr. Haila. We'll go this order. So we'll start with Dr. Haila, please.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, so I have a couple of quick points. The first has to do with the relationship between economics and SDGs, and of course the very important fact that without the models, we cannot see the interrelationships between those SDGs, and those SDGs we all know are interrelated, they're integrated, and without seeing the relationships, we cannot see how the work on one affects and is affected by the other goals. So that is very important. But also, in addition to that, economists can also, I think, or economics can help play a role in identifying, for example, sustainable funding options that can help with implementing those SDGs. Economics is also able to clarify that the economic dimension of implementing the SDGs needs to include the estimated cost of inaction. We need to take into consideration that if nothing is done, there is a cost to that, and this is something that economists can definitely draw attention to. And also, I know that there is a social dimension and all of that, but well, unfortunately, profit still is something that people are after. So we economists can also draw attention to the fact that investments, sustainable investments, do not have to be not profitable. They can sometimes be profitable. And that investments in sustainable goals can actually there are so many market opportunities, investments in food, in agriculture, in energy, in cities. All of those can be profitable. And this, if we raise the awareness about that, this can help bridge the financing gap that we talk about. If people know that they can invest and make profits out of that, this encourages people to take care of that. So that's one thing. The other point I wanted to talk about quickly is the relationship between the universities and SDGs. And this has to do, of course, with education, including the curricula, all like courses and ideas of all awareness of SDGs. But also, in addition to that, a very important role that universities can play is outreach, what is called the third mission, which is like educate the society, educate people, raise knowledge and awareness about the SDGs, and make people also take role in capacity building, like School of Business. I'll talk about executive education, for example. We can actually, universities can capacity build and offer courses to stakeholders to educate them about the SDGs. And of course, universities, in addition to the education, the research, the outreach, they can also be like champions of public opinion for SDGs. They really support all of the projects and all of the programs that are in support of SDGs. So that is just part of what universities can do to support SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hala. Dr. Hisham, please.
Hi, thank you for great presentations. At the risk of being a bit extreme, but so my background, I'm not an economist either, but I do public policy. So the first thing is I don't think public policy people, although I agree with much of what Dr. Shireen said, want to be told what to do by economists. The other thing I would argue, my background is environmental economics. And one of the big arguments is that there has to be a paradigm shift when it comes to economics. I mean, there has to be a huge change. So, you know, going back to Adam Smith, he, as was mentioned earlier by more than one person, he talked about social good, and it was a very different era. I think the other issue also is the SDGs are aspirational, right? But the discipline of economics is grounded in numerical loss and gain outcomes. And putting those together is difficult. Eradicating hunger, I don't know how you measure that. Gender equality. Now, of course, I know economists can measure that. I know, we had this discussion earlier actually, but in some things as public policy or political scientists, not everything can be measured, at least numerically. And the other thing people would argue is the question of gain. What does profit mean? So from an economic perspective, profit is monetary. From a political perspective, profit is political gain. But some things just need to be done because they're right, without financial gain or political gain. And I think the SDGs, as aspirational as they are pushing us in that direction. And relying on corporate social responsibility, they pay less than 2% of profit. That's nothing. They get tax exemption, they hardly pay anything. And we're talking about a period after COVID where so many people lost their jobs. but all companies are, and other companies, are showing the largest profits they've ever made. And yet, CSR is not the answer anymore. There has to be something beyond that. And political gain, classic government budgeting, also has to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your points. And actually, let me connect what you said to the first roundtable that we had with this business forum about sustainability or sustainability financing, and raising the role of CSR as being one of the responsibilities of the private sector towards sustainability. And is it the real sustainability solutions? Do we look at CSR as the real sustainability solutions or not? So thank you very much for the points that you raised. Ghada, please.
Okay, thank you very much for this invitation, and I'm really enjoying the discussion. I present myself. I'm Ghada Nadi. I'm managing editor of Business Forward. It's the digital publication of the AUC School of Business. So first, I start with agreeing with what the role models and thought leaders in this discipline have been saying, that the economics has not failed us. The priorities for the Egyptian economy are known to everyone in the room, and it's largely contextual. But definitely there is something to be changed in the discipline of economics. There is things to build on. So I start by saying that before coming to AUC, I worked for almost 10 years in the UN. And before that, I was a student at AUC. I was an economics student, hoping that I will go out there and change the world. And I did my master's in international development in AUC as well. And this is where I want to draw an example of the design of this international development program had something called the practicum, where we went and we worked with an international development agency or organization or civil society organization. And here is where I learned what they don't teach you in the books. So I worked on an education project in Upper Egypt, and I learned that it's not that you invest in schools and you get better socioeconomic outcomes. Sorry, it's not that simple. There are many complexities, as Dr. Hebe mentioned. You have to work with the local authorities. You have to consider the culture. You have to have a very good system to make sure this program is efficiently being implemented, and more importantly, how to sustain it afterwards. So all of these are things that you learn when you roll out your sleeve and go out there, right? And in Egypt, there are many multi-million-dollar programs that have been implemented for years, national level, involving governments and international organizations, and they all have evaluations and lessons learned. And it's a wealth of information that's not used, that students can use to learn from, in the same way that they use case studies like the KCC Center. So when students study these, it really helps with their understanding, and it helps them to relate what they're studying to how to solve, how to create solutions. Another example I want to draw on, so we have resources we can build on, like the JPAL. I know they're not here right now, but JPAL do impact evaluations of pilot projects. Someone's here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the impact evaluations they do of pilot projects or projects in design, they use econometric models and they crunch the numbers. But at the end, all this is to inform policy and to show what it means for real lives and real people. And this is what students need to be more involved in and applying in the learning. Finally, and not that I want to advocate for Business Forward, but in Business Forward, sometimes we have students writing for us, and they are economic students, and a lot of them tell me that writing for Business Forward helps us solidify what we're learning, because we're relating it to a real life situation, like the supply chain crisis and how this impacts our local food market prices, for example. So they apply this, and this is itself a skill, and it's a different skill than writing an academic paper. It's the skill of being able to say in simple terms what the theory is saying and applying it to a relatable situation, and this is a definition of success, and in my opinion should be a learning outcome for economic students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ghada, for your points. So we always say that teaching could happen inside of classrooms, but learning happens outside the classroom. And I think one of the things that we teach the students, and many of them are sitting at the back here, always laughing when we say this, but how to write in a very concise way to deliver a message so the reader can actually benefit from it. They always think that this limitation of word counts is just to make sure that we are not having the burden of reading too many words, but it is one of the skills, as you're saying, that they need to learn how to say what you want to say so you're actually heard in a way that can make a difference. Dr. Amel, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be listening to all those inspiring discussions. I mean, speaking of the SDGs, one thing that we have is the Egypt Volunteer Report. And this is a report that I share with my labor economics students, particularly for SDG number 8. And with students at sophomore or junior level, they will be easy to pinpoint the gaps in the report. And this is the government presenting the report, so they are the owners of the data. And there's lots of gaps on the indicators, on all 169 indicators. And the question arises, you know, why don't we have the information? Is the information missing, or is it not being presented? And you know that what's not measured is not there. So it's very important to make sure that we have social accountability and we grow young people who can also assess the information that they're being provided and sort of critique it and hold the executive part of the government as accountable for that. Speaking of policies, also the economic instruments that we have, whether fiscal or macro policies in the country, we see that a lot of those instruments are not targeting the SDGs. There are different mechanisms that can be put in place so that they target the indicators and the targets of the SDGs, whether it's gender-sensitive budgeting or in relation to climate or whatever else. And when the government puts those in the macro fiscal framework, this sends cues to the private sector. This incentivizes the private sector to act in a certain way. So this is not there. And I think more than, you know, doing the policy recommendations that we sort of talk to ourselves in a way, or talk to the government, but they don't want to hear us, but maybe more talk about, do the advocacy role, the part that many of you have been speaking about, that we are aware that policies do not happen in absentia of institutions and individuals. So there's a huge role for advocacy. Someone spoke already about action-oriented research and going to the communities to sort of try to get the information. And with platforms that are in place, for example, if you look at a platform like Wazzaf in the labor market area, the level of information, the big data that is available in real time, and how dynamic and realistic it is, and how we could, you know, make best use of those. Everybody emphasized the importance of multi-sectoral approaches, and the SDGs by design were designed to work together, not as individual silos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amel. Dr. Amr, do you want to make a...
Yes, thanks a lot for the invite. I'm enjoying the discussion very much. I'm not an economist. I don't come from an economics background. I'm mistaken sometimes with the economist because I'm a political economist, which is like a fake kind of economist. Or like a wannabe economist or something, yes. So the thing is that I was, raised academically on a very long and elaborate critique given to economics by people like stretching back to the 1940s, if you think of Karl Polanyi, all the way to the 1970s, for instance, like the work of Mark Granovetter. And this has created a tradition, / an industry of its own, of people that badmouth economics. They don't speak with economists. Economists most probably don't know that they exist. And it stopped there. The idea is that you just have like this very weird absence of conversation about people that speak about economics, but they don't actually engage economics. And the point is that we never, it is said that we can bring in this critical discussion into the field of economics. Then there's always the problem that this might be sucked up by the orthodoxy that has proven to be quite resilient. And what is seen sometimes as quite dogmatic when it comes to the definition of theory in the small sense of theory, in the medium range theories, that this variable goes with that variable. rather than theory as people in social, like in humanities, to be more precise, think of it as rather like a big narrative that assigns a certain ontology to society and hence to economy. And I always thought that this is really more of a question to the like economists, is like what happened to the critique that has been produced in other disciplines, and the sometimes very like wholehearted attempts by economists to become interdisciplinary or to become political economists themselves while being real economists. So yeah, it's just like this point that I had in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mirat, I think you wanted to.
Thank you so much for asking us today. I'm glad to see that I'm not the only non-economist, but I'm still quite aware that any discussion of why the discipline has failed in a room full of economists is extremely dodgy. I don't think that the discipline has failed. I think, like a lot of other disciplines, it is struggling to keep up with an extremely rapidly shifting environment. I think it's also, economics is referred to as a science, but some sciences are easier to see and touch than others. If you're a rocket scientist and you send a rocket up, if it goes up when you want it to and comes down when you want it to, that's a success. But economists are in the business of making predictions, and it's difficult. And it's also, economists don't work in a vacuum. They are part of the political process. They are extremely susceptible to ideology, as Amra pointed out, which is why you have right-wing think tanks and left-wing think tanks producing very different ideas on the same discipline. But there's also, as part of this rapidly shifting world, I think we live in a world where there is a huge shift to an increasingly interrogative means of dealing with the world, catalyzed and lubricated by social media. We have students breathing down our necks back there, and I'm sure that very, very few of them are going to accept something just because they have been told that this is what they should be accepting. And economists have to try and find their way within that. And this is a university, and therefore the perfect place, as many people have pointed out, that economics should not be taught in a vacuum. You can't study chemistry without leaning on physics. And I think for economics, you can no longer study economics without heavily leaning on political science, on anthropology, on sociology. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, and I think economists need to be aware of that. But there's also something else that's been mentioned by many people, and I think everyone around this table might agree to it, but businesses might not. In my possibly jaded experience, large corporations don't do things because they're the right thing to do. They do them because they're profitable. And therefore, perhaps one of the things that economists should be looking at is how to make it easier, or how to have corporations arrive at a place where doing the right thing falls into the same lines as doing the profitable thing, which is where you could bring in all your SDG goals. And I'm going to stop now because I know there are other people.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rana Hindi, and then I'll come.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here with economists and non-economists around the table, distinguished, and the distinguished speakers, of course. When I looked at the title of this roundtable, the first thing that came to my mind is that economists are not one group. So which economists we're talking about, right? We're dealing with economists versus non-economists. But the thing is, within the discipline of economics, there are very different ideas, very different schools of thoughts. So which ones we're talking about? So, I mean, we've heard, the ideas of Adam Smith and others, so it's very important to keep that in mind, that economists never agree. And I say this to the students who are sitting here. So even within economics, that's what I've learned since I joined this profession, is you sit in a conference, you talk about one topic, and you hear, you know, very, very different ideas and feedback depending on what ideas you believe in. But one thing that is common is, and I think this is really what matters here, given the topic we're talking about, is, okay, now that we're talking about how to deal with those global challenges, I think it's the power of projections, of making projections. So of course, access to data, as it was said, is very important. So that made me think of demographic transitions, of course, as one of those major global challenges, but also, you know, Dr. Dina mentioned many of those, digitalization, automation, and so on. And when we're talking about SDGs and the discipline of economics, now, if we're making the right projections, you know, we'll be able to identify what exactly needs to be done. So Dr. Shireen said that policymakers usually know what to do, but they don't know the how. I think in many instances right now, they don't know the how, and they need to know the how and and what to do as well, right? So I think that's really why economists, are expected to help, you know, to be able to use these tools, these data to identify the main challenges, but also identify how to go about them, how to solve these problems. And what to do is also very important. And that also reminded me of one research I worked on with Dr. Mahmoud Mohiddin, and it was about the role of economists in designing public policies. And let me share with you one of the main findings of this research. So basically, we were looking at economists in the MENA region, and we asked them about their ideas, their schools of thought, and so on, and also how they contributed or they were able to contribute to the designing of public policies. And here are, you know, the most important findings. First, mostly senior economists are able to contribute to this policy discussion. Junior economists are often excluded in our countries. So I really think that this is really important. This is what will bring the new ideas to the table. Male economists are the ones who are usually represented. So I think the underrepresentation of female economists, and believe it or not, but we found that female economists usually believe in different ideas than male economists. So that's another interesting finding. And since we rely on senior economists only, little quantitative evidence, little data evidence is used, which is becoming, you know, really, really important nowadays. And another finding, and this goes in line actually with what Dr. Huda said about the way we teach economics. And one interesting finding was that regardless of where you know, you learned economics, whether it was in the US or North America or Europe or the Middle East, you know, very similar ideas, traditional theories are taught. But we need this new way of teaching economics. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rana. I'll start with Professor Angus, and then we'll go around the table again.
Dina, thank you. I've got 2 points, but just an observation. First of all, we've heard Adam Smith being name-checked on multiple occasions around here, and it's just a plea to recall that Adam Smith's first seminal text was The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It was a philosophical book. It wasn't The Wealth of Nations. And if one wants to name-check Adam Smith, one needs to name-check Adam Smith in the round and anchor economics in that wider societal context. So that was just an observation. It was only born by the fact that I have the privilege at Edinburgh Business School of owning and running Panmure House, which is Adam Smith's original home. So we feel very a strong degree of affinity with Adam Smith. My 2 observations are, and you might see them as slightly contradictory in the first instance. The first one is a point that Dr. Eber raised around localization, around the locality. I'm always struck by Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the Congress in the States, who described all politics as being local. You can also make an argument that all economic development is ultimately local. And this is not just an issue in Egypt. If you look in the UK, there's a whole agenda around levelling up. There's devolution, trying to get power out of London to the great cities of Manchester, Leeds, etc. And it really is trying to ensure that communities have ownership. So if we're serious about economic growth and SDGs, it is very much, I would argue, about there being a strong sense of local ownership and local engagement. It is people doing things collectively themselves rather than having things done to them, which is a classic top-down central government failing. So I'm talking about local, so I think localization is really important. It might seem slightly contradictory to this, but I also think we need to take a whole systems perspective on this, rather than just zeroing in on a particular angle. And I want to really focus on health, because I think unless we deal with health challenges, many of our economic challenges are not going to be addressed. And again, my apologies, I'll cite UK data, UK experience here. We have a real issue with productivity. We have a real issue with labour market participation. And you look at one of the factors behind this, and this is the level of ill health. So if you look at benefit claiming in the UK, you will find there has been a massive increase in the level of the population claiming health benefits and being out of work due to ill health. It was estimated in the northwest of England, where we've got a number of major defence manufacturing plants, that the productivity of the region was 15 to 20% lower than it might have been if we had addressed the underlying health challenges and brought people into the labour market. So I think when we look from an economics point of view, it is about drawing on that whole range of richness that economics brings to us, that philosophical, that political approach. Sorry, I don't think that's being a fake economist, being a political economist at all. I think it's being very original, but it's about bringing regional economics, it's about bringing health economics into the mix. Economics is a lot to deliver, but it has become dangerously narrow in some of its thinking around the SDGs.
Thank you very much. I think we can have room for one more intervention so we can conclude the session. So I think we can have Ms. Sandra, if we can keep it to 1 minute so we can work on the wrapping. I think the discussion is not going to stop here, and we need, I think, more and more hours to continue this discussion. So I think after the session we can go outside and we can continue the discussion. And I think we have one of the observers want to contribute with an intervention as well. So 1 minute only. So Sandra, please.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. I'm Sandra Farid. I wear 2 different hats. I run a consulting company in Egypt, and I'm also the economic advisor of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. I will talk about 3 or 4 main points here. Coming from the consulting field and being an economist by the nature of my education, the question of whether it has failed, economics has failed or not, my answer is it has definitely failed. This is my opinion. It has definitely failed. And this is the reason why. I mean, we're looking at monetary, just by looking at monetary and fiscal policy being applied. I'm not discussing the case of Egypt specifically. I will just quote the Fed when a couple of months ago they said we are yet to understand inflation. In my opinion, we are not yet to understand inflation. We are yet to understand how the Gen X and the millennials are handling inflation. So it's not the inflation that we need to understand. The same applies to Egypt. We're seeing the central banks applying the same monetary policies that were applied in the 90s, the early 2000s, and are still being applied now, with the notion that when you increase interest rate, we curb inflation. If the whole world is increasing interest rate and inflation is not being curbed, because nobody's looking at how Generation X and the millennials, including myself, are reacting to the changes in monetary policy. It's still the saving options of the central bank and the deposits and the securities, the options that Generation X and the millennials are using to save money, the answer is no. Who's using this? The older generation. So if you look at when I had a discussion with the National Bank of Egypt, asking, have you looked at the ages of the people doing the transaction of the 25%? The answer was, what are we looking for there? My answer was, you're looking at the actual drives of inflation, the economy. Who is spending and how are they spending? So the 25% deposits that were skyrocketed in terms of the amount that the money collected in 4 weeks was not driven by the generation that is now earning the money and actually driving spending. So it is not about the theories and how we apply them in terms of monetary policy and fiscal policy. It's about consumer behaviors and how different generations are acting and reacting completely different to such policies. So in my opinion, economics as it is, one thing that I think I was taught intro to macroeconomics in 2007, and I came back at AUC to teach it in 2021, and I taught the exact same course using the exact same book, saying the exact same things that are no longer relevant. So I had to say in class, these are the theories, especially when it came to monetary policy and fiscal policy, these are the theories that are in the textbooks. Are they relevant? Do your parents do X, Y, Z when they hear? So they went back to their parents and their friends of their parents and I asked them to fill a survey. So they came back with the actions about how their parents are saving their money or reacting to inflation or reacting to monetary and fiscal policy. So what I would add to such discipline is consumer behavior. And with this consumer behavior comes psychology, and with psychology comes neuroeconomics and neuroscience. And with this comes, of course, the actuarial and statistics and the numbers of it. As is economics working for the private sector that I consult? No, it is not. But with the huge increase in the interest rates, the private sector that is heavily dependent on facilities in Egypt is completely going stagnant. So how can we curb inflation when we are curbing the private sector operations because of the facility of now at 16 or 17% loans? Which private sector can operate? And if the private sector not operating, products are scarce and they are getting more expensive. So the way the policies, the government policies or the central bank policies are applied are coming from very old economic theories that we were taught back then, and I thought my back then is 15 years ago, and there is, I think, older back then 20 and 30 years ago, and nothing much has changed. So to wrap it up, I would definitely believe that when we discuss monetary and fiscal, and this is all an example because of the interest of time, I can go through so many theories that I have wrote down that are no longer relevant as is, while still being applied as is as well by older generations that are now running the central bank and the fiscal unit in the Ministry of Finance, for example, blaming nobody. It's just the way things are applied. So to wrap it up, if we want to continue to have this discipline, serving actual related on market and bridging the ever-growing gap between the theories and what's actually happening, we need to start working on a multidiscipline. And everybody has said this before, I'm not saying anything new. It's consumer behavior, it's neuroeconomics, neuroscience, psychology, in addition to the math. And again, when we look at our courses, the 316 or the econometrics, applied econometrics, we're spending so much time teaching students how to to run the models, not how to create the models. So many of the young people sitting there come to me for internships and for hiring positions. I have a couple of them staying at my office now. They don't know how to create a model. They know how to run a model. But how to think which betas to include in the model that can actually reflect changes in the market is my problem. I always ask them, what kind of beta do we need to include to be able to assess changes, fiscal changes, monetary changes, consumer behavior, purchasing power, so on and so forth? Is by choosing the betas, not by being able to run the model whether with a software or by hand in exams that I used to do 15 years ago, 11 years ago. So this is my 2 cents. Thank you, Dr. Dina.
Thank you very much. I think we can now give the floor to the co-chair of the session, Dr. Ismail Sarwat, to, oh, sorry, I forgot. Farid, 1 minute.
Thank you, Dr. Dina, and thank you to everyone for these insights. When I was hearing the discussion, I just thought of something. When we look at the SDGs, we look at it's a great blueprint for the whole world. But the problem with it is that it is self-contradictory in some sense, that it applies to both developing and developed countries at the same time. Perhaps the models are there, but the models need to be better contextualized in where they are and to be better used in mobilizing the proper resources. So if we take a model and perhaps within the African region and academics, experts, policymakers, they would sit and then they would create a mirror or a continuation of the SDGs to be applied to such regions which face different challenges. For example, in Africa, Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change, food security. But at the same time, they have abundance of resources, as Dr. Hoda was saying, such as the solar energy, which is not available in Europe. And then we start seeing the discrepancies, that the challenges and the abundances that we have in developing regions are significantly or quite different than those that are faced by the developed world. So when trying to apply a universal, one uniform framework, it is of course great as a blueprint or as a guiding principle. However, stopping there, we're not going to reach a lot. So we need to contextualize it in a more regional approach. And of course, the SDGs are being used by national governments and their NDCs and their direction. But before going into the localization step, perhaps we can approach a more regional, directed towards the developing approach for developing countries to identify where the gaps are. And from there, our models can actually be better suited to mobilize resources, but also to mobilize private investors in such regions. Of course, private investments that are operating in a developing country where there is a high-risk environment are significantly different than those operating in a developed world. So when we want to actually advocate for better targeting, better corporate social responsibility and so on, then we need to address these points. And this was just my points. And of course, thank you for all the insights, and thank you for all the points that were very helpful and very, thank you.
Thank you very much, Farid. Ismail, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone for their thoughtful interventions, and it's a pleasure to be with you all here today. And I hope that this is a springboard for more collaboration, thoughts, research together, inshallah, in the future. So it's hard to summarize all this richness of discussion, but I'll try to mention the key pillars I think that we discussed here today. And first and foremost, I want to remind ourselves why we're here, right? We're here because we want the future to be better. We want to achieve these big goals, right? And I like the example you mentioned, Jose, which everyone now, whenever they come to give a speech, they tell us about what ChatGPT would do first, right? And then they tell us what they would do. But it's the point of the example is profound, because the reason we're here is because humans still matter, right? So human creativity and innovation and intuition and our ideas matter. So hopefully this serves as a launch point for more of this thought in this direction. So yeah, we here at AUC and academic institutions, we're trying to build the leaders of the future. The students sitting in the back, Farid, with your thoughts, all those things should be incorporated in your future work, right? And what you try to do. And we want to achieve these big goals. We want to be able to deal with the crisis that we now face. We have new realities with, first we're pro-globalization, now big discussion about de-globalization and the big inflationary shocks we're seeing in all over the world. Big conflicts. Okay, so how do we deal with all that? And I think when we're discussing SDGs, we have a few big ones that we tended to be mentioned here in the discussion, which are education, inequality as it's pertaining to growth, health, and also population and migration. But let's start with the education, since we are here at AUC, and it's about people, right? People are going to drive this change. And so to your point, we do need students, and we do need to embed these technical, right, mathematical, quantitative foundations so we understand where models come from and not just how to run them without understanding their conclusions properly. We should incorporate the culture of SDGs And I think this is a movement we have here at AUC, and we're trying to now spread this change. We need to upgrade our teaching styles, incorporate more practical experiences, which then can translate into more successful actions in the practical world. To incorporate vocational training, right? That still has an impact. And we must not forget that, even in the new high-tech world we live in. And also, we can't forget the role of outreach and advocacy of academic institutions to keep spreading the word, right? And to realign our focus on these big goals. And so, yeah, talking about implementation, of course, it's very important for us to prioritize. I don't think we have 17 goals, 169 targets. Okay, what's the priority, right? We should think about that. And of course, we need a lot of information and data. This really is a big struggle, especially here. And in most developing countries, right, there's a lack of visibility on, you don't even know where to begin your scientific approach. So that's a problem as well. An important issue, can we do feasibility studies to know how to go about them? Another important point is fiscal sustainability. So how can we sustain the pursuit of these big goals, right? Otherwise, it will be a lost cause. And also localization, very big, important point, and how to adapt to national context overall, and that's something very profound. Yes, another pillar is cooperation and collaboration. And so we don't want to be working in the individual silos, right? There used to be multiple types of cooperation. So at the academic level, we need multidisciplinary cooperation. So political scientists shouldn't be afraid of economists, and economists shouldn't be afraid to interact with other people from other disciplines as well, right? There should be a complementarity from an economic, social, political point of view. We need intergovernment collaboration. We need inter-university collaboration. We need to communicate, disseminate knowledge, policy research, right? That has to spread out. And then to encourage this critical discussion and thoughtful debates on the discipline and on how to approach pursuing these big goals. Another pillar is accountability, right? So we need to ensure that the institutions have an important role to play, right? And in the political setting, but also there's social accountability, right? So even at the organizational or individual level, there's a big point to be made about social accountability. And yes, moving now to another pillar, which is the private sector, right? So that's a very important one as it drives really the economy, and we need a paradigm shift. So as you mentioned, corporations are still driven by profit, and so how can we then change the goals to improve society? Can we still improve society while making profit? There are lots of models proven to do so. Can we move more in that direction? Can we spread more examples? Can we create more awareness about sustainable opportunities? I think that's an important point. And lastly, I conclude on the pillar of research, which I think is also very important, since this is the knowledge by which we drive humanity forward. And so a lot of important points were made. The fact that we need to have more applied active research in the practical setting. We need to provide solutions to the issues and not just discuss the issues themselves. We need to incorporate the behavioral dimension, right? So human behavior and the assumptions of rationality that we make in models, right? So there's obviously the discipline of behavioral economics is very important. So can we apply it more to SDGs? And we also, the point was made that we need the models to build on, right? They help us connect the theory with the data, but that doesn't mean that they failed per se, but maybe it's a starting point to build on. And another important point was, how do we reconcile with these things that are hard to measure, like hunger, like inequality, like gender inequality? Can you truly measure it? And then how can you then align incentives with these big goals? So not only with private corporations, but with academic institutions, social institutions, international institutions. I think there's a big discussion to have about aligning incentives, while not forgetting the role of ideology and schools of thought. Yes, so I want to thank everyone for their time. It's been a very rich discussion. I hope this leads to more collaboration and cooperation between all of us together in the future, so that we do pursue these big goals, right? We do want to change the world for the better. So yes, thank you everyone, and I pass the floor back to you, Dina.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for for today's discussion. As Dr. Dina mentioned, this is just one step on a long journey, and I repeat myself, these conversations are extremely important because we take those seriously. Over the past few years, those conversations led to some changes in the programs that we offer. On this edition of the forum, we've started off with a conversation on sustainable finance, and that actually led to drafting a research piece. As we went on to the 2 hours conversation the day before yesterday, and the subsequent conversation we had on Sunday. I'm moving on to the second panel, which is family business. They had quite an extensive program already in place, but we shaped it up on a more regional aspect and dimension again on Sunday. I'm just giving you examples of the actions that are taken based on those conversations. Macro-credentials is just taking us all by storm, and I think it's going to change the shape and how universities function. I'm not sort of discounting how the universities are going to operate, but surely they need to become consistently innovative to be able to deal with the changes that are taking place worldwide, and the dilemma between the degree programs and the capacities that actually us and our graduates need to obtain. Case studies are always extremely important. They reflect reality. They are the bridge between what we say in the class and what happens out there. Because, I mean, and I'm not talking only about economics, by the way, that many people think of theories. It's still theories are there in management, big time, across the field. But case studies are also important. When it comes to this conversation, I think it sums it up by saying rethinking what to teach and how to teach it. That sums it all. And that's a job that not only academic institutions can do by themselves, but they also need the support of the different constituents in the community. The one word that was, I'm happy that it was repeatedly mentioned, is the silos. That's the biggest problem. The silos, and silos in many ways, and I can attest to that, having been engaged with this university and this institution for a very long time, appears in some disciplines versus the other with different degrees, but it's magnified when it comes to economics. And that has to change. And the title of our discussion today can never be realized. It can never be addressed unless we seriously and effectively and expeditiously do exactly what you did. Look at that from a multidisciplinary approach. Looking at it vertically will not get us anywhere. So as much as I'm happy that I see actions that are coming out of the other roundtables, the action moving forward coming out of this roundtable can be summarized in one thing: breaking that silo. And I think I'll work with my colleagues on this issue. So again, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for those who attended and those who intervened. The summation of this roundtable we put together in a document. Happy, obviously, to share with you those documents, but also happy to share with you, if you wish, the documents that will come out from the other conversation as well. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in next year's edition. Bye-bye.
Everyone, can we please come to the stage for a group picture?